Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. It's a new week, and of course, that means a new mock draft. Welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, presented by Club Fantasy FFL. I am one of your hosts, Evan. Of course, right next to me is my co-host, Ryan. Good morning to you, sir. How's it going? Another week, another mock draft where we educate you tips and tricks how to beat your fantasy league and get that championship trophy. This week, we're doing another 12-man rookie draft this week. And then next week, we're going to have a very special guest who we're going to be doing just a regular redraft with Caitlin, who is a fantasy champion in her league. We've got a regular Joe coming on the show.
She can't do the 16th. I thought
she can't do the 16th.
The 23rd. Yep.
23rd. So it's 2 weeks. We're going to have a regular Joe. Correction. Well, before we start the draft, make sure to follow us on Club Fantasy FFL and all the social media platforms. Of course, as always, on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe as well. So, Ryan, tell us a little bit about today's draft. It is a 12-man rookie league draft. We've got it's a bunch of auto drafts we got today. We got a couple of people, then the rest auto draft. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So we decided, me and you decided way before this, we wanted to kind of run our rookie drafts pre-draft and post-draft right after so we could compare. And first and foremost, I'm just glad to have Evan back on the show. If you guys tuned in last week, I talked for 25 minutes about the little 10-team draft by myself. I felt like I was doing an infomercial the whole time.
It gets a little lonely by yourself sometimes.
It does. It really does. But I want to just kind of throw out, I'm going to pop our draft board up on the screen right now. I'm not going to hit start just yet. But as you will see, we have a bunch of auto drafts. And some people might look at this and be like, well, that's not a great draft. It is still a great draft if you approach it a different way. This may not be the most realistic draft. It could be in a single QB very realistic, but the auto drafts are going to go strictly by ADP and then team composition. So it gets a little weird in the later rounds. But here's why this draft still has value. Especially for rookie drafts, I go into this situation with players I am targeting. And I've been talking about it in the Club Fantasy chat. There are specific players that I want to walk out of every single draft with, and their ADP is going to play a big part into that. And in a rookie draft, you will see a ton of trades. I'm in trade negotiations in 3 different rookie drafts right now.
Wow.
We're obviously not going to do that in our mock draft, but that's where you're going to get the feeling of when do I need to trade up to get my guy? Because I'm going to tell you right now, 2 of my guys have second round ADP. And the question is, am I going to take one at 112? The answer is hopefully yes. Am I going to take one at 112 and then hope the other one falls to me at 224 and then just kind of make decisions at that, or 212 rather, but the 24th pick of the draft. So there's still value in this. You just have to use it maybe a little bit differently. So rather, and we're going to talk a lot about strategy today, rather than set up my entire draft board like I would do for a real draft, I have made a queue of the 5 guys. There's only 5 rounds. The 5 guys I want to walk out of here with. And when I inevitably get sniped, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So
I think so also too, Ryan, before you actually, if you want to start the draft, I'll go into my.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, the draft is going to go quick. I want to throw that out for everybody. The draft is going to go quick. I will keep the board up on the screen. We're going to compare to the other draft. We'll talk a lot about the draft, but this draft with these auto picks is going to blaze through. So.
I was going to say too, before you go ahead and start it, going into these mock drafts, especially if you have a lot of auto picks or pickers into it, it kind of gives you a better strategy to your drafts because auto picks are auto picks. They're going to pick whatever's off the board that's best available. Now, since you're going to be ranking your players how you want them to how you want to pick them off the board, this definitely gives you that feel of, okay, well, if I'm in my real draft and this person takes this person ahead of me, which I had them ranked, then I need to readjust and recalculate how I'm going to pick the rest of my players. So this is actually a good thing for players too. If you really kind of want to know how it feels like to be in an actual draft, go in a mock draft where there's a bunch of auto picks where, hey, you're going to have a few of the guys that you want already off the board already. So I think this is a good strategy too by doing these types of drafts.
Yeah, I agree completely. And let's be clear, you may even see situations where you end up, if you're in a public league, there could be a bunch of auto draft picks in your real draft.
That's true.
So you need to make decisions on that. So.
That is very true. So, since the last time we spoke, a lot of the rookies have been signed to their teams.
Yes.
Still no
guaranteed contracts.
Huge guaranteed contracts.
Yeah.
Huge. And I saw a meme, or it wasn't a meme yesterday, but it was I forget which publication came out with it. It was the amount of money that Malik Willis lost because he fell to round 3. I know he would have gotten $30 million guaranteed in the first round, but since he dropped to the 3rd, he got only $5 million. So
yeah, that's not the headline you want to read about yourself.
No, not especially like losing out of $25 million that you could have gotten if you would have been drafted the first round. But that's an uncontrollable that they don't have any control of. And especially if, a lot of teams didn't really see the value of getting a quarterback in the first round, which only one team did, and that was Kenny Pickett going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So,
yeah.
What is your thoughts on the draft? We haven't talked since the actual draft did happen. So, any surprises that you saw during the first round and maybe the second or third that, really kind of stuck out in your mind?
Yeah, and I don't mind saying my people out loud who I am looking for. The big surprise was we're going to start with the big issue. Quarterbacks. The fantasy community love these quarterbacks far more than the NFL loved these quarterbacks. So you had Pickett, like you mentioned, going round 1, and I really think that was Pittsburgh getting their guy. And when it was all said and done, it almost looks like they overdrafted him.
Right.
But then to not see either Ritter, I guess either Ritter, Coral, or Willis go in round 2. It took an entire another round before those guys went. And so that was very interesting to me. So I'm going to start with get my guy strategy here.
No, you're good.
And so that was very interesting to me. And that's what made it look like Pickett was overdrafted. So when you had these guys so close, are we just very wrong as the fantasy community, or were the Steelers wrong? Because it's very possible the Steelers were wrong.
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think with Pittsburgh taking Pickett, it was almost kind of like fan service to them because it's the hometown kid you're going to have him bring in. But, is he going to work in Pittsburgh? We don't know.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. And then I was really impressed with wide receiver landing spots.
Yes.
I was not mad about any wide receiver ending up where they ended up. I'm not one. Maybe George Pickens. I don't love that in Pittsburgh, but I don't hate it either.
I think from what I got from the draft, and I only really watched I watched the first round and I watched a little bit of the second. But a lot of teams really drafted where they're drafting of their needs. And I go towards Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay really had a really good draft and they drafted the real needs. They didn't really make any kind of, special. I mean, they made a couple trades, but they didn't make any kind of splash out of the worldly like picks. They drafted for what their team needed at the time because they need help on defense. They've got some aging defensive players that they may not even re-sign. Like Sue and JPP. So bringing in Logan Hall was a great pick for them. He's going to help out on the defense, I think, day one for going into that. So I think a lot of teams just really went into this. Now, obviously, there was a few teams that just their drafts were terrible. But, in the long run, I think a lot of teams were really smart about how they drafted this year. So that's why, even though this and I keep saying this, I think this year's draft wasn't as flashy and really wasn't as hyped up as last year's draft because of all the quarterbacks that came out of last year's draft. And it was, I think, more this year was a smart draft for most teams when it came to their picks.
I think that's a very good analysis of the draft because I was going to say I didn't even really have a lot of people stand out to me who had a bad draft. I've talked about this last week and basically every show for the last 2 weeks. The Jets did what every fantasy manager wants to do in a draft. Best running back, best corner, top 5 end rusher, top 3 tight end. And I'm forgetting. Oh, and in my opinion, the best wide receiver. Plus, they still added depth later on in the draft. You have to love what the Jets did. There's no denying that. But that we're acting like first round picks can't bust.
They can. A lot of them can.
And then it just becomes a very expensive mistake that sets the Jets back for years. So
let me ask you, Ryan, with them drafting Breece Hall in the second, which I loved. I thought that was just a steal in the second where you got him. How are they going to manage that tandem of him and Michael Carter together?
So it's funny. You're asking a question that goes into a mindset that I was struggling with all last weekend. And I want to give a shout out to one of our writers, Chris Molina, for kind of talking me off of a ledge. I was a big Michael Carter guy.
Me too.
And I was probably and I encourage you and any other Michael Carter guys to go back and do this. I was probably romanticizing his rookie season a little bit too much. If you go back and look, it was 2 to 3 solid games. It was the really weird, 13 target game. He wasn't that good. I think it was only 3.7 yards a carry. Now, keep in mind, the Jets were not a great team. There was a lot to like about Michael Carter, but he was not as good as what we expected. So initially, I was saying it was going to be a struggle for Breece Hall to walk out with 55% of the touches. And Chris Molina basically called me an idiot, which he has every right to do. and said, you want to go look at this. Michael Carter's an afterthought at this point. They're not going to throw the ball a ton to the running back anyway. The carries are going to go to Hall. He's going to step in and be a 60, 65% guy right away. And I went back and looked, and sure enough, everything Chris said made a ton of sense to me. So I won't be surprised if Carter falls sub 150 carries, sub 50 targets, and Hall is a 225 to 250 carry guy, still probably looking at 30 to 40 targets. It's not a big throw the ball to the running back team, because what people have to remember is those huge games last year, that was when Mike White was at quarterback, and that's a worst case scenario for the Jets. If it's Zach Wilson, it's not going to be a ton. Plus, they've got better in the wide receiver room. So don't expect a lot in the passing game. But the best comp, when Chris proved me wrong, that I found was, this is almost word for word the story we were telling about Jonathan Taylor in his rookie year. Was, what about Marlon Mack?
Yep.
Mack was coming off that 1,100 yard, like 6 touchdown season. What about Marlon Mack? Marlon Mack was a 4th round pick 2 years before this. Michael Carter was just 1 year before that. We knew going in, well, most of us knew going in, apparently not the Kansas City Chiefs, that Jonathan Taylor was the best running back in the draft. Why are we worried about Marlon Mack? And thus, why are we worried about Michael Carter? I think Breece Hall is going to be fine. I love the pick, and I think he's going to eat.
I think so too, especially with that offense now where Zach Wilson has even more and more weapons, where it's almost like, okay, it's almost too good to fail, which it's the Jets, so it probably will fail. So
I was going to say, what a unique way to describe a New York situation, because the banks were too big to fail as well.
Yeah, I know, right? All right, so let's go over the rookie draft we just had. It's I know, of course, 5 rounds. It goes like that, especially with auto picks. So let's kind of do a deep dive into this.
Let's preface to anybody in Dynasty, your rookie draft will not go this fast. I'm in the 3rd round of a draft that started like last Friday.
Any picks that kind of stand out to you the most?
With the auto picks, not at all. I love the comment Joel brought up that he saw Cook go 102 in a draft. You had kind of popped it up on the screen there earlier. Those are the weird things you're going to see in a draft without a lot of auto picks. I was paying attention. Austin auto picked at Kenneth Walker. I don't expect to see Walker go 102. I think you're going to see Breece Hall 101 universally. We've talked about this for 2 weeks. Superflex, single QB. If you're playing 3 QBs somehow, Breece Hall is the 101. Maybe not in 3 QBs. That's a made-up league anyway. But I think you're going to see favorite wide receivers go before you see Kenneth Walker. And then it's really, when you break down these wide receivers, it's take your pick. I know very smart people who will put every single one of these wide receivers, with maybe the exception of Jameson Williams, but they'll put the next 4 guys as their wide receiver 1. There's an argument to be made for Burks. There's an argument for London, Wilson, and Olave. So Williams is the only one I haven't really seen anyone say is their 1. Sky Moore going right there. I know Josh Hudson, the founder of Club Fantasy, just took him at the 1-8 in a draft I'm in with him. That's a perfect spot for him. Everybody's happy with the Kansas City. James Cook, he's been the hardest one for me. I hate Buffalo running backs. I'm notorious for it. I stay away from them, but he was the 3rd running back taken and still taken in the 2nd round. The draft capital's there. It's a great offense. I just don't think it's a great offense for running back. So I would say no real surprises outside of me, and I'm not just trying to talk myself up. I am a John Mechie guy. I don't know if he goes at 112 in the draft, but I am doing this get your guy strategy. So I will openly tell you the 2 players that I will be heartbroken if I don't leave drafts with, if I have the draft capital, is John Mechie and Isaiah Spiller. And as soon as I saw the auto picks, I knew I wasn't getting Spiller in the 2nd round. That is about where he's falling. But those are the 2 guys who I feel like are being overlooked by a lot of drafters. So I wanted to make sure I left with Mechie knowing I wasn't going to get Spiller. I was only going to get one of them. So.
Ryan, I'm glad that you kind of mentioned like the guys that you want to leave the draft with. Like it's out of the 5 rounds, give me kind of like an either like an over under of like an expectation is okay. How many of my hot list of draftees that I want to get, how many should you expect to maybe pull out of a draft? Is it 2? Is it maybe 3? Is it maybe all 5? Maybe all 5? Like how many do you expect to, on an average, to bring out of that draft?
If you study ADP and you are a shrewd negotiator, I think 5 is sort of maybe a little out of pocket, but 4 is definitely doable because I don't care what your draft position is. If you want your guys now, don't be stupid. Don't trade great guys on your roster to get 3 rookie picks for guys that you don't know if they're going to hit. It's not worth it. Keep the good guys on your roster, but be willing. I'll tell you the situation I'm in right now with Julia Papworth, a writer for the Fantasy Footballers. We are down to the last guy I want in this draft. We're in the middle of the third round, late third round. I want Khalil Shakir. He is the last player that is available that I still want. I got him with the second pick in this draft. I have the 310 and the 312. She has the 308. So I'm offering her the 10 and the 12 for the 08. I'm losing depth, hoping that she wants depth to get the last guy available that I want. And so her and I are going back and forth right now. I'm like, don't you want 2 picks? Like you're trying to sweeten the pot, but she also wants Shakir. So it's hilarious. She was like, do you want Shakir? I was like, that's exactly who I want. I was like, enjoy him. You're just breaking my heart right now. And then she's like, now I feel like you're using reverse psychology on me. So like these negotiations, and she still hasn't made her pick. Like, so she and I have been talking. So I'm hoping when I'm done with this, I'm going to go over and see that she accepted my trade. But I would say 3 is very doable as long as you're being reasonable with your 3. The way I'm approaching this draft is the first 7 picks. I want those guys. And it's literally the first 7 picks of our draft. Hall, Walker, Burks, London, Wilson, Williams, and Olave. I want those guys. So if I'm in the first 7, I'm not trading out of the first 7. I want those guys. Then for me, it is Mechie, Spiller, Shakir, Ritter, and Justin Ross. So I want 5 guys, and their ADP kind of makes it possible. I know that Mechie and Spiller have the same ADP. So what I will tell you is I do not like 8 through 12, not counting Mechie. I will happily, if there's a person who has close to each other's second round picks, I will happily trade out of the first round for 2 seconds at the back end of the first round. So it's all about how you strategize. There are going to be players that you're going to want to leave with that you're not going to get, and it's going to break your heart. Sometimes it's the best thing. Sometimes it's the worst thing. I have not landed Isaiah Spiller yet, and it's continually breaking my heart. But the statistics out there for third round running backs, I should probably just calm down a little bit because he's probably not going to hit anyway. He is, but he's probably not going to. But like last year, I went into drafts knowing I wanted to leave with Jarrett Patterson and Kadarius Toney, and neither one of those look really great right now. And so I don't know, like we get so caught up on these rookies, and I probably overpaid for these guys. I'm forgetting the kid's name, Keyshawn Vaughn down in Tampa Bay. I tried to pay tooth and nail to trade up to get him in the second round and got shot down on every.
Aren't you glad that it didn't go through?
And Josh reminds me to this day that he saved me from Keyshawn Vaughn by not making trades with me. So like sometimes a friend of mine who's going to be on this show later next month, a friend of mine always says to me, sometimes the best trades you make are the ones that get declined. And so like you end up with your guys and get to keep them. And I think that's huge. No real surprises though. It's a single QB league. Kenny Pickett, middle of the second round. I guess Ritter falling all the way to the back end of the third and then just loading up on quarterbacks at the end. But I also think that's auto draft and the way I have the draft set up. I think these teams thought they had to leave with a quarterback because I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know who B. Peters, C. Kelly. I don't know who these players are, and they got drafted. But Brian Robinson's an interesting case because a lot of hype coming out on Brian Robinson right now out of Washington, where they are essentially anointing him as the 1B to Antonio Gibson already, comparing them to Jonathan, the Carolina backfield, D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan, whatever the hell his name was. But they're comparing them to them. And so you have Gibson there, and then you have my guy, Jarrett Patterson. You had J.D. McKissick, but now you have Brian Robinson, who's already being anointed, and he's falling all the way to the middle of the third round in a draft where there's not very many good running backs. Jerome Ford. Jonathan Stewart. Perfect. Yep. Jerome Ford's an interesting one because Cleveland's a great landing spot, but he is just dead on the depth chart right now. So I would say no major surprises whatsoever, but you're never going to see major surprises in an auto draft league. I do want to briefly talk about the live drafters we had with us, because I feel like they all did very, very well. Starting with Joel. Joel, stayed chalk. Brees Hall at the 101, grabbing Dameon Pierce at the 201, a running back who has a chance to start day one in a very non-competitive Houston backfield. Zamir White, they just decided not to pick up Josh Jacobs' fifth-year option. Zamir White is likely a starter next year. And then to land Malik Willis all the way in the fourth round, Kenny Phillips on a team that needs wide receiver help. Great job by Joel. I think Austin auto-drafted, to be perfectly honest. And landing Jahan Dotson. He landed Jahan Dotson because I did not take Dotson. That's a great pick in the second round. I know Walker was an auto draft. It's not a bad draft at all. I don't even know who the QB that was taken down there is. Color, I think this is his first time joining us. Wonderful draft. Garrett Wilson. I'm not a huge fan of Wan'Dale Robinson, but to land a second round wide receiver that late in the draft works out well. Jelani Woods could start in Indianapolis. Tyler Beatty, it's going to be interesting because of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, so you don't know how everything's going to play out there. And then another one, great Jameson Williams pick. Kenny Pickett. Keontae Ingram's we're big fans of him here. Velus Jones is a guy who we actually talked about a lot after last week's draft, because Velus Jones has a third-round draft pedigree, but he is falling to the fourth and fifth of every single draft right now. All we talked about before this draft was Chicago needs a wide receiver, and you may not have known who Velus Jones was coming into this draft, but you should know who he is coming out of this draft, and the fourth is probably a little bit too late for him.
I keep telling the guys that in the league I'm in now that was a redraft, now we're transitioning into Dynasty, is when you really have to pay attention. Now that the draft is done and over with, everybody's been drafted by their teams. Yeah. You really have to pay attention to the off-season stuff of what's going on with OTAs and training camp, because that's when the real strategies really happen, especially closer to when the season starts, because that's when when these rookies are going to emerge as either the starter or the backups when it comes to when the season starts. And I'm glad that you brought up White from Las Vegas, especially with the Josh Jacobs situation where they didn't pick up his fifth-year option. So with Josh Jacobs, this is a cut or loose situation where it's either put up or shut up this year, or he's done so in Las Vegas, or he might even be done before that if Las Vegas says, hey, we could get maybe a draft pick or two out of him if we trade him. So this is where, paying attention to the Twitterverse and everything on Bleacher and ESPN, this is, and listening to us here on Club Fantasy FFL about the transactions that happened during the summer, this is where you really need to pay attention, because this is where your rookie draft is really going to kind of matter of who's going to be starting, who's going to be on the bench, and going forward into the season.
That's a great plug without even realizing you were doing it. We are 2 weeks away from doing our Look Inside series, where each show, we spend the entire show focusing on 3 teams. So that's all we talk about is the depth chart news, the training camp news, the rookies who are impressing. We talk about our sleepers for each team. There's a lot going on there, and those shows kick off in about 2 weeks. So absolutely stick with us, because that's all we focus on over the summer leading up to our Women of Fantasy shows in August. So.
Awesome. There's a question I put in our chat before we started. Have you been to a draft, like a destination draft for any fantasy teams yet?
So I've actually never done a destination draft. I had a league where we set aside money to do a destination draft, and it just never actually happened. We were going to go to a really nice country club in West Virginia. We are all from Ohio. Yeah. And golf and drink and fantasy draft. We never did it. So the closest I've ever got was when B-Dubs used to do their big come, we'll give you $50 in free food. But that was just in my hometown. So for the most part, we're a bunch of, grimy guys in a basement making draft picks is pretty much us, or online these days.
So we were supposed to do one 2 years ago before COVID hit. We were supposed to do a destination draft down at Key West. And now we're okay, I think we can do it this year. So we're
I think so too.
Yeah, we're starting to pick out Airbnbs down in Key West about doing a destination draft in there, which I think will be cool. So yeah.
Yep, and I guess technically this year it'll be a destination draft. I'm born and raised in Canton. Well, not in Canton. I don't ever want to have those words passed through my lips. I'm from Massillon, Ohio, Canton's rival, way better town. But anyway, from the Canton area, and there are always drafts at the Fantasy Expo. And now that I'm in New York, I'm coming back to do those drafts. So that would be, I guess, the closest to a destination destination draft, driving 10 minutes from the house I grew up in to do a fantasy football draft, which I basically have done my whole life, except now it's an 8-hour drive.
Not bad, not bad. All right, awesome. Did you want to put up the draft from last week to go over that
that'd
one?
be great.
Okay,
yep. Cool. Give me 1 second. I'll click stop sharing here. Bring us back.
Now, this draft last week was full, correct?
This is not, yes, but it's 3 weeks ago. It's the same exact league settings, except we didn't know landing spots. That's the major difference. I think it's this one. No, that's the not full one. It's this one. All right. And then there you go. So that is how it all went when we didn't know landing spots. And so some of the ones that stand out to me immediately, Jameson Williams. I don't think Detroit was as great a landing spot as we had hoped for, really. There were a lot of rumors the Jets were going to end up with him, and instead they ended up with Garrett Wilson. So Jameson Williams fell from the 3rd pick down to the 6th pick, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in draft capital, it's a lot. And then, of course, there's my guy, Isaiah Spiller. There was so much hope for Spiller, but this is the thing I want to draw everybody's attention to. Isaiah Spiller was universally the 3rd best back in this draft. And yes, the draft capital is not there, but the Chargers are not a bad landing spot. Nope. Austin Eckler is not going to take every single touch there. Josh Kelly's not the answer. Josh just had to feed me the guy's name last week.
Justin Jackson.
Justin Jackson's gone.
That's right.
So
he is gone.
People don't even realize he's free agent. And then they drafted a kid last year who was also not very good. And so they need help at running back there. Don't forget about Isaiah Spiller in the 2nd round of your draft. Trade up for him. Trust me. David Bell's another one where fantasy analysts loved David Bell. He went in the 1st round of this draft, going to Cleveland, which again is not a bad landing spot. He actually fell, man, I'm struggling to even find him here, middle of the 2nd round. So from a 1st round pick to a mid 2nd round pick. Everybody else stayed pretty consistent, except take a look at those quarterbacks, because you had Willis and Corral go in the 2nd round. This is a 1 QB draft. Pickett in the 3rd. I still landed Ritter at the 312, so clearly his value hasn't changed. Howell went before him. Nobody is thinking about drafting any of these guys anymore. So it's a very, very different draft. But then this is where you could make the argument for drafting early if you look at some of the late round kind of steals. Tyquan Thornton ended up with 2nd round draft capital. He went in the 5th round of this original draft by Faith. Great job by Faith in general, because the other guy I'm going to talk about is Tyler Allgeier, who is in Atlanta and could be the starter, and fell to the 4th round in today's drafts because of that situation in Atlanta. I believe, end of the 2nd round, Faith was able to land him in the 4th here. So there's an argument to be made that as bad as it is to draft early and as rough as it could be to draft early, it could also be very, very good to draft early if you make the right picks.
I like this draft. I like it a lot, actually. I love Faith's picks.
I hope I talked well about Faith at the end of this draft, because she
tends to scold us. Yes. Yeah, she did really well. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this draft right now, if Faith had done this draft pre-landing spots, Breece Hall, she did right. Justin Ross, while she took him entirely too early, he ended up undrafted because of injury concerns, but now he ends up in Kansas City. And if you love what that means for Sky Moore, you can't hate it for Justin Ross. He's a very talented wide receiver who had 2nd round talent, just injuries. Alec Pierce ends up in Indianapolis, where they need somebody to play opposite of Michael Pittman. As I mentioned, Allgeier in Atlanta is probably the starter. And then Tyquan Thornton, I don't know what to feel about this pick, because they spent a 2nd round pick on the guy, but they just got Devontae Parker. They don't throw the ball a ton. It's a weird pick, but I'm just saying, looking at this now, Faith wins. Faith wins by a lot if you go back and look at this right now.
She had a great draft. I wonder what her prep, and speaking of prep, how is your prep and draft strategies going into something like this? And I'll reference my league. This is the first year that we're doing Dynasty. So our rookie draft is our first one ever. So give me some prep strats that you have going into something like this.
For rookie drafts, especially if you're anything like me, and there are probably people in your league like me, I do not watch college football. I'm saying a single down that isn't a highlight film. I do not watch college football. I vaguely know who wins the national championship. It's just not my game whatsoever. I live and breathe professional football. Find people you trust who do watch college football. That's what I'm not trying to even plug our show here, but for the entire month where we talked about rookies, we brought people on because we understood. Joe and I don't even watch college football, and Josh lives for Florida college football. And so there's a lot we miss when we do that. Find people you trust. And I can give you my guys. I'll openly tell you just about everybody a part of the Football Guys Dynasty community, specifically Jeff Bell, Kevin Coleman, Alfredo Brown. These are the guys whose information I take in as much as I can because they live and breathe Devy and Dynasty information. And so I build my rookie ranks based on a lot of what they say. And then landing spots and draft capital are huge for me. So when you're looking at a rookie draft capital matters more than landing spot. Keep this in mind. But the best advice I can give you is create yourself, even if you just make a list of, 20 guys that you want, that you feel like are in good landing spots. That way, when that list starts to dwindle, when it's time to make trades up, and don't be afraid to make trade offers. That's what makes a dynasty draft fun. So your first rookie draft, know their landing spots, but know their draft capital. I cannot emphasize enough the role that draft capital plays into success and even opportunities in the NFL.
I know a lot of people say that draft position, especially in the regular draft, kind of matters in some.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
Does draft position matter as much as it does in rookie drafts than it does in the actual draft?
Changes every year. This year, I want a top 7 pick. If I don't have a top 7 pick, I want 2 second-round picks. So position doesn't really matter to me as long as you have a good grasp of ADP. Okay. And that's where mock drafting comes in wholeheartedly. And even if you're doing a mock draft by yourself, it's going by the site's ADP. What I would tell people, and the best advice I give people, is I love mock drafting on Sleeper for our shows because it's the easiest, it's the cleanest, it's one of the best apps out there. Mock draft where you'll be drafting if possible, because ADP is going to drive this draft. Not everyone in your league is going to know every rookie. I did a mock draft with just some random people on Twitter last week, and by the time we got to the 4th and 5th round, they were openly admitting they don't know these players. These are the people in your league. Take advantage of that. It's about getting the edge in fantasy. But what I would say is draft position outside of I want to be in the top 6 of the first round. It doesn't matter to me. I know Isaiah Spiller, John Mechie are going to fall typically between 6 and 8 in the second round. So my goal is to get 2 of those picks, and I'll use what I can. I'll openly admit if I have the 1-9 and I can land 2 picks in the middle of the second round for the 1-9, I'll make that trade all day. I don't care about Sky Moore. I don't care about George Pickens. I'm just not sold on those guys the way I am John Mechie and Isaiah Spiller. And if someone offered me John Mechie and Isaiah Spiller for Sky Moore, I would take that trade as fast as I possibly could. And I feel like most people would too, but they don't look at it that way. They're too worried about being had on not blowing a first round pick to go get 2 second round guys. In rookie drafts, stick with what you believe in, but focus on draft capital and landing spot. Mechie has the draft capital. Spiller has the landing spot for me.
Okay. Gotcha. Good to know. Yeah, I know, because we're going into this, and a lot of the guys that I play with, and I think you just said it, I used to be a big college football guy. I haven't really been paying attention to it the past couple of seasons. So going into this, I'm kind of, like I said, this past draft wasn't flashy like last year's draft was. So a lot of these guys I haven't really had any kind of tape about, I haven't really learned about. So a lot of the guys that are in our league are like, well, I've never done this before. And the best advice I could give them is go on social media, look at articles, and listen to podcasts that really highlight the rookies, because that's where you're going to get most of your information from about who to draft and who are the best picks and the sleeper picks that you can do in your rookie draft, because it is all about the situations that they're coming into, the offense that they're going to be going into, because you wouldn't want to draft a wide receiver. And I'm glad that you singled out Williamson. He's going to Detroit. Detroit's kind of a dumpster fire when it comes to wide receivers.
I was going to say, they just paid a ton of money to get TJ Chark. They had ARSB from last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They still have see, I do so bad on names when I'm on the spot. Quintez Cephas, who was like a fantasy hype guy 2 years ago. Like they still have all these players, so there's no guarantee. And Williams isn't 100% healthy. So.
Right. And you don't want to spend like a really high draft pick on somebody that's going to be the second or third stringer, because then you're just wasting a pick. So you really have to do your homework. You really have to listen to what, us as analysts and people on the social media platforms are saying about, going into fantasy, because ultimately we kind of do know our stuff when it comes to helping out with the draft. So,
well, I was going to say, Evan's setting up the plugs. This is the best setup show ever. This Friday, Club Fantasy, by at least this Friday, we will have our top 60 rookie ranks. And I've specifically made it 60 because most drafts are 12 teams, 5 rounds. So I want to make sure you have a name for every pick, no matter what pick you're in. So we'll have our top 60 consensus ranks. At the very least right now, it's going to be me, Austin, and Chris Molina, who it'll be our consensus. We're still waiting on some ranks from some other people. So
awesome. Well, this has been another class that's been in session.
Actually, I think it's Joel. Joel's in there too. I don't want to disrespect Joel. He's in the chat with us. So.
Well, awesome. There's been a great another Monday show for Mock and Lock. It's hot. We will be back next week with another mock draft for you guys to get all your fantasy tips and tricks to win your fantasy football drafts this year and your leagues. Make sure to check out Steve Lawson's new article on the 3 underrated running backs for the 2022 season. And also a special episode of No Pun Intended this week is the annual IDP show. Josh takes the week off, so Ryan will be hosting. All right, Ryan. As Joe and special guest Nate Markham introduce and prep you for IDP leagues this season. And of course, this show will be back next Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new guest and a new draft format. Make sure to hit subscribe and follow us on all the social media platforms at Club Fantasy FFL. For myself and Ryan, this has been another edition of Mock It Like It's Hot. See you next week.